Vodka. My name is Mary Rains. I'm the Barley Markets Manager for the Australian Export Grains Innovation Centre, AGIC, based in Perth, Australia. I will be your MC for today, so welcome everybody. For those that are joining us now from Thailand and from the Philippines, we have this presentation webinar will be translated into English and into Thai. So for those wanting to hear the presentations in Thai, on your Zoom account, along the bottom of your Zoom account to the right-hand side, there is a global icon. If you could click on the global icon and then select the language that you would like to listen into today's presentation. You can either click English or Thai. Okay, we still have a few people coming on, and I will start with the official welcoming or the unofficial welcoming of today. Again, my name is Mary Rains. I'm the Barley Markets Manager for the Australian Export Grains Innovation Centre, AGIC, based in Australia. I will be your MC for today. So I really would like to welcome Thai people for today's webinar. This is the first time AGIC, on behalf of the Australian grains industry, has facilitated a webinar on alternative Australian grain crops for swine. I'd like to welcome Australian grain trading industry on board as well, and also those people that are tuning in from Singapore and Thailand. Just a few housekeeping for today's webinar. If you would have IT problems, can you put that into the chat box on this Zoom account? If you have any questions throughout the presentation, can you put that into the Q&A account? Today's webinar will be is being recorded and it will be sent out for yourselves later post this webinar session. So again, I'm really glad that everybody is online, and through today's webinar, we will go for 1.5 hours. We'll start with the official opening from Austrade in Thailand with Ms. Karen Sermon. We'll follow on from a presentation by myself, and then we'll lead into the technical presentation by Mr. Tony Edwards. This will be then followed by a panel session chaired by Mr. Richard Simonitis. So with no further ado, I would like to officially welcome with no further, I'd also like to make comment that Thailand has been a terrific importing country of Australian grain for feed purposes, and the Australian grains industry do value that from our Thai friends. And so without further, I'd like to move on and open to today, officially get today's presentation opened by Ms. Karen Sermon. So Ms. Karen Sermon is from Austrade, the Australian Trade and Commission Councillor based in Thailand. Karen has spent 15 years living and working in China, Singapore and Thailand, spanning roles both in the private and public sector. So Karen first joined Austrade Commission in 2013 when she was the Austrade State Director for South Australia before commencing a 5-year posting into Shanghai as the Trade and Investment Commissioner. In 2018, Karen relocated to Bangkok, where she was based with the Australian Embassy. And over the past 8 years, she has led the team in infrastructure, advanced manufacturing technology, and in innovation, plus F&B and consumers. So Karen, thank you very much. It's really great to have you on board. And I'd like to hand over to you to have the official opening for today's webinar.
So thank you very much, Mary. Sawadee ka, everyone, and good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you are. On behalf of the Australian Government and the Australian Trade and Investment Commission, I'm delighted to welcome you to today's seminar on extracting full value from an alternative Australian feed grains for swine. Just let me tell you a little bit first about Austrade. Austrade is the Australian Government's trade and investment promotion agency. We have 80 offices in 50 locations around the world, including 7 offices in ASEAN. That includes posts in Singapore and the Philippines, and of course here in Thailand. We help to promote Australian goods and services, as well as research and development and technologies, and to facilitate connections between buyers, sellers and investors. Our work spans many sectors, and of course, very important to that is work in the agribusiness, food and beverages space. Here in Thailand, we are based at the Australian Embassy, and we hope to showcase Australian expertise and to connect you, our Thai customers and Australian businesses together. Shortly, you'll be hearing from experts at the Australian Exports Grain Innovation Centre, or AGIC. AGIC was established in 2012 with the role to support international customers of Australian grain. And they do this by providing the latest information, technical support and training, just as we're doing today. The purpose, of course, is to help you, our buyers, get the most out of Australian grains. Their facilities include research laboratories, a pilot mill and a pilot bakery, and commercial analytical laboratories. AGIC is an investment of the Australian Government through the Grains Research and Development Corporation and the Western Australian State Government. And AGIC, together with Austrade and the Australian grains industry, places great value in our relationship with Thailand, our Thai feed millers, feed nutritionists, and the enzymes industry. We're committed to supporting you by providing practical information about Australian grains that you can take with you and use in your own businesses. And as I said, that's the purpose of today's seminar. So over the course of the next hour and 25 or so minutes, you'll be hearing an overview of the 2020-21 availability and production of Australian grains across wheat, barley and sorghum. Then you'll hear some insights into the benefits of incorporating these grains into swine diets, helping compare the nutritional value and optimising enzyme use, in addition to calculating shadow pricing for feed rations. The event will conclude with a panel session, and we really invite you to raise questions of our experts during that time. Before we start, I just wanted to reflect on the global drivers of food production and consumption in today's world. And we all know it's very different now from just even a year ago. But some things haven't changed. With global population growth, there are still many countries facing acute water and food security challenges. Growth in middle incomes is seeing a greater demand for safe, high quality food and beverages. And with more protein being added into traditional diets, there is increasing demand for quality, high energy feed inputs. We also need to remember that environmental factors and the COVID-19 disruptions to supply chains have made global sourcing closer to home an even more important consideration. And as Australia and Thailand are both net food exporters, we can make an important contribution by working together. Australia can supply high quality, safe agricultural commodities, ingredients and pre-packaged foods to meet Thailand's food and feed manufacturing industries and direct to consumers. Thai investment into Australia's agricultural and food processing infrastructure will help to make the most of our clean, green environment. And we can share Australia's expertise in agricultural technologies, advanced food safety and environmental practices to increase Thailand's own domestic productivity. Over the past more than 40 years, Thailand and Australia have developed a very strong trade and investment relationship, and we want to build on that. Just last year, grains, dairy and beef products accounted for 60% of the value of Thailand's agricultural imports from Australia. That was worth just under $600 million. Australian grain has great opportunity. Global demand and pricing changes have created opportunity for Australian grains in Thailand's food manufacturing and animal feed markets. And this is the case because Australia is a world leader in the production of high quality, safe and clean grain that's versatile and reliable. Australian grain is grown in one of the cleanest environments in the world. And for those who may have visited Australia, you would have seen that firsthand. And our product has long storage viability due to its low moisture and low mycotoxin contaminations. The position that Australian grain and in fact Australian agribusiness is in is really due to the pioneering efforts of our farmers and the research and marketing undertaken by key stakeholders such as AGIC. In Thailand, the Thailand-Australia Free Trade Agreement, or TAFTA, eliminated import duties on barley upon entry into force in 2005, which is further providing a strong incentive for Thai importers to develop ties with Australian grains exporters. So there's lots of things we can do together. Let me close by thanking you all for your commitment to the Australian grains industry and the investment of your time today. Greater uptake of Australian barley in Thailand will come through sustained collaboration. We're committed to delivering education events such as today's session on extracting full value of barley for livestock feeds to help you improve your own businesses. I'm sure you'll gain useful information from the following presentations. My colleague Kun Kenita will be assisting with the Q&A, so please raise any questions you have in either English or Thai to make the most of this opportunity. Can I close by thanking AGIC again for the opportunity today, and to our speakers, in particular Kun Pichet, for what I know will be an expert contribution to the discussion. I wish everyone a successful day. Thank you.
Tremendous. Thank you, Karen, for the very informative and warming welcome and official opening of today's webinar. We're really excited because this is the first time that we've been able to launch AGIC on behalf of the Australian grains industry, the focus of alternative Australian grains into Thailand, particularly focused on swines. Rightio, so we will move into, so just a little bit of housekeeping before we move on to the presentations for those that have come in late. If you've registered late and you would like to hear this webinar session in Thai, along the bottom of your Zoom account there will be find the icon, the global icon, and tick on it, and then drop down into whether English or Thai as if you'd like to hear it in that language. For Q&As, could you put the Q&As into the Q&A session? And as Karen just said, Kanita will be doing the translation. If you have IT issues, can you put that into the chat box? Because we will be able to assist you with your IT issues if that's the case. Throughout the presentations, we're going to hold all the questions to the end into the panel. So you'll hear from myself and then next from Tony, and the questions we'll hold them over to the panel session. Okay, thank you very much. So I will be the next presenter. So again, my name is Mary Rains. I am the Barley Markets Manager for the Australian Export Grains Innovation Centre. I'm based in Perth in Australia. My role as Barley Markets Manager for AGIC is to understand the market requirements for Australian grains across Southeast Asia. My presentation to you today is on production and availability of alternative Australian feed grains, wheat, barley, sorghum for swine, focused for swine. As I take over, I'm just going to give you an overview of who the Australian Export Grains Innovation is, talk about the Australian grains industry, touch on the 2021 production and availability of Australian grains. I'm going to talk a little bit about wheat, focus on barley, and follow up with sorghum. And then we're going to look into the future of what the 2021 season looks like here in Australia. So my key messages for today's presentation that is in-market technical engagement will assist purchasers and customers of Australian grain to gain full value out of using our products in your businesses. Australia produced over 51 million metric tonnes of grain in 2020-21. Looking at 2021-2022 season, we're currently under a La Nina condition that's provided very good rainfall at the end of the season and also at the start of the season. So we're in a very good position for the coming year's production of grain. Feed grain demand is expected to increase globally. And we know that the Australian feed grain suits the Thai market requirements. And when we look at barley, we know that barley is a highly functional grain for the swine feed rations. So again, AGIC on behalf of the Australian grains industry is engaged with the feed and swine industries to ensure that they gain maximum value out of using barley in their swine rations. So following up on what Karen just said and talking about who the Australian Export Grains Innovation Centre is, we are an independent non-for-profit company. We are funded by the Australian government and by the Australian grain growers. We were established in 2012 to increase value in the Australian grains to our customers, both at a domestic level and also at an international level. Our facilities include research laboratories, a pilot milling and pilot bakery. We have a head office based in Perth in Western Australia. We also have another technical office in Sydney. We work across Australia's major grains of wheat, barley, oats, to a lesser degree of canola, pulses and sorghum. AGIC has a strong focus on collaboration across the whole of the supply chain here in Australia and also to customers who purchase the Australian grain, be that government, trade, industry bodies, peak industry representations, to ensure that we are fully collaborated and we provide that technical information so everybody feels informed about the Australian grains industry and our capabilities. AGIC particularly works to understand the technical and quality requirements of customers of our Australian grains, be that for wheat for bread, wheat for noodles, wheat for cookies, be that for oats for noodles, oats for rice, also barley for malting and beer, but here we are with barley for feed grain uses. AGIC is the leading organisation in Australia to provide technical training and information exchange and in-market support for the Australian grains industry. Our technical training can be in-house, business to business. It can be collective of all businesses together. We provide a lot of webinars, or pre-COVID, it was a lot of in-market conferences as well. We have the information exchange in print or digital. In digital, in 2020, we released the virtual updates of the Australian grain production, which were provided quarterly to customers of Australian grain. AGIC also has research facilities, and we enjoy the research collaboration, which we do have with commercial companies and also universities. So when we look at the Australian grains industry, for those from Thailand that haven't been to Australia, I've just got up a map here of Australia. The area coloured in green, shaded in different green, represents the winter grain production of Australia. When we look at Australia, it is just under 4,000 kilometres east-west. Annually, we plant 23 million hectares of commercial grain crop. 12 million hectares of that is planted to wheat, and on average 4 million hectares is planted to barley. Sorghum, we plant just over 500,000 hectares. In Australia, wheat and barley are winter crops, so they are planted in April, May and harvested in November, December. Our summer crop includes sorghum, planted anywhere in September, October, harvested December and January. Australia is a large country, and so therefore we have diverse soils, diverse climatic conditions, farming systems and markets. The red dots on the map of Australia just indicate the ports that grain is exported out of. So when we look at the strengths of the Australian grains industry, we do ensure that quality assurance. We do produce some of the cleanest grain in the world. We have some of the brightest grain, but more importantly, the driest grain. So that does help with storage facilities. We also produce food safe and feed safe grains. We have a supply chain that constantly reviews itself to ensure that it has systematically streamlined processes of grain production from farming to export. The advantage of Australia to Thailand is our proximity to market. Australia also provide updated, accurate country information about our grain production seasons throughout the year. We provide that technical customer support, and the Australian grains industry will continue to engage with the Thailand feed millers and nutritionist industries post this webinar. When we look at the Australian grain production over the last 5 years, in 2016-17 was Australia's largest production of grain. We produced over 56 million metric tonnes of grain. 2018 and 19, we experienced droughts. 2020-21, we produced over 51 million metric tonnes of grain. When you look at Australia collectively, and we look at our grain crops, on the 5-year average, you can see that wheat is 52% of our total grain production. Barley is 24% of our total grain production, and sorghum is 3% of our total grain production. Now, I've just got up a very busy slide of the Australian wheat productions from 1989 to most recently 2021. The yellow bar graphs indicate the area of wheat planted across Australia. The white line indicates the production of wheat in Australia. So you can see from 1989 to 2021, Australia has increased its plantings of wheat, and our production is also peaks in 2016, but it also indicates that Australia does produce continuity of wheat. Looking at barley, from 1989 to even recently to 2020, you can see we plant up to 4 million hectares of barley. We've come a long way since 1989. This has come through advanced technologies in research, breeding, and also in farming systems. But my point in this slide that I wanted to point out to you if you're purchasing barley is that Australia does produce a significant amount of barley, but more importantly, out of the 9 million metric tonnes on average that we produce, we only use 3 million metric tonnes domestically. So we are a net exporter of barley. So if you're looking for business purposes of planning and wanting continuity, Australia will be always a net exporter of barley because I said we only use 3 million metric tonnes domestically. When we look at the sorghum industry in Australia, in 2020-21, Australia planted just under 600,000 hectares of sorghum, and we produced around 1.7 million metric tonnes of sorghum. And as I said, sorghum in Australia is planted between September and November and harvested between November and January. The area of sorghum grown is in far north Queensland, central Queensland, and northern New South Wales. Now, when we look at the 2021 Australian outlook season for our grains industry, we're coming off, and the Australian grains industry is very dependent on rainfall. With the La Nina that we've experienced, we've had significant amount of rainfalls at the end of 2020 and also at the start of 2021. So we have ideal subsoil moisture conditions for the planting of Australian grains. To date, at the moment, it's looking very promising with the above average rainfall for our continuity of supply of grain. So my take-home messages for this presentation is that in-market technical engagement from the Australian grains industry will be there as the Australian feed industry continues to industrialise. In 2021, our seasonal start is very favourable. Australia will remain a stable market option for grain. The Australian feed grains suit your market requirements. The Australian complements Thailand feed grain, where we don't compete with Thailand. We have an abundance of grain. And Australia is technically engaged to fully support the Thailand feed and nutritional swine industries into the future. Thank you very much. So we'll move into the second presentation of today, and I think this presentation is going to be extremely valuable for most of you there listening. We have Tony Edwards. He's a technical feed swine consultant for AGIC. Tony has been working in the swine industry for just under 5 decades. If I said 50 years, that makes him sound a lot older. So Tony is an Australian animal nutritionist who has, as I said, been involved with the swine industry for just under 50 years. Tony has consulted widely throughout Asia, including Japan, Korea, China, Philippines, Vietnam, Malaysia, Indonesia, India, and Pakistan. That's a long list, Tony. So with no further ado, I'd like to introduce Tony as our next speaker for today's webinar. And his title is Extracting Full Value of Alternative Australian Feed Grains for Swine Feed Millers and Feed Nutritionists in Thailand. Thank you, Tony.
Very good. Thank you, Mary, and welcome everybody to this webinar As Mary said, I'm a commercial animal nutritionist here in Australia, and we have a very significant interest and extensive experience in pig production. And currently our company probably supervises about a third of the Australian pigs in terms of their nutrition. What I want to talk to you about today is the use of barley, wheat and sorghum from Australia as alternative grains in pig diets in Asia, as I believe there's quite an opportunity here at the moment to consider these. But, oh, hang on. Here we go. I'm going to get my slides to work. Sorry about that. Before I start into the depth of the talk, I'd just like to first cover some of the key points here. Why is this not behaving?
Just go up, Tony.
Yeah, I'm having trouble today. There we go. Right, start again. Okay, so the key messages that we really want to just cover first of all is the fact that pig production itself is quite competitive and cost sensitive, and that feed is the single biggest cost involved in pig production, and we need to be flexible in regard to the ingredients that we use in our diets. Fortunately, pigs are very adaptable and can meet their nutrient requirements from a whole range of different feedstuffs, and so we can be very extensive in our view of what they might be fed. Corn and soy are commonly used for this purpose, but they're not essential ingredients for the diets. And here in Australia, we use very little of them, and I'll show you that shortly. In Australia, we tend to use mainly barley, wheat, legumes, and canola meal as the basis of our diets, and we achieve excellent results with these materials. This year in Australia, we will produce a near record level of 12 million metric tonnes of barley. And this means that barley is going to be readily accessible and attractively priced, not only here in Australia, but elsewhere. If we look at the world production scene, you can see that it's dominated here by corn throughout the world, quickly followed by wheat, and then down to rice, and in fourth place we have barley. The amount of barley there looks relatively small, I guess, against some of the other grains, but it is a substantial amount of grain that's used, and it's used for many different purposes. These grains are used for human food, they're used in the brewing and distilling industries, they're used as animal feed, and more recently a lot of grains being used for ethanol production. Of the barley here in Australia, the lion's share of it would be used for animal feeds. So we're very familiar with using this grain in our diets, particularly pig diets. If you look at the production and export of grains around the world, firstly on the left-hand side of this table, we have the wheat picture, and you can see here that China and the EU and India are major producers of wheat, but China and India export very little. They tend to consume internally most of what they produce. And of the other countries there, Russia, US, Canada, etc., Australia, they are significant producers, but also significant exporters as well. And you can see that of the 30 million tonnes that Australia would produce, we export nearly over half of that material in 18 million tonnes of export. On the barley scene, adjacent, it's a slightly different picture. The Europeans are very strong in barley, and quickly followed by Russia, and then Australia is number 3 on this list. But when it comes to the export aspects of barley, you can see that Australia is actually very similar to the others. So it's a major exporter of barley on the world scene. And I think that's an aspect that you need to be aware of, that the supply of barley from Australia is readily available. In terms of this particular current grain season, it is, as Mary mentioned, it's a near record production season this year. We have over 51 million tonnes produced, dominated by wheat and then barley, of course, but also indicating here there's quite a broad spectrum of different grains grown, certainly a very useful profile of legumes grown that we can use in stock feed as well. And on our oilseed front, our predominant oilseed is canola. Features of this table are that we grow very little soybeans and very little corn. So we're very familiar with creating feedstuffs from materials other than corn and soy. In fact, this table here shows the profile of materials that are commonly used in stock feed manufacture in Australia. And you can see we use a broad spectrum of different materials. And in fact, feed mills may utilise 20 to 30 ingredients at any one time. On the cereal front, we do use mainly wheat and barley, but we also use oats, sorghum, triticale, corn, rye, rice, etc. when it's available. We do use extensively legumes in terms of lupins and peas and faba beans, and a whole spectrum of lesser products. Australia has a very large cattle population and sheep population, and as such there's a lot of abattoir activity, and therefore our predominant protein source has been meat meal traditionally. But we do use a number of other plant-based proteins, but I guess today more and more we're using vegetable proteins, and these are dominated mainly by canola in the pig side, and to a lesser extent soy. We use a lot of milling offals from the various food processing industries like mill mix or bran and pollard from wheat, rice pollard, oat offals and legume offals, etc. We use the full spectrum of synthetic amino acids to complement the diets and get them perfectly balanced for maximum results in the stock. And we do make good use of a lot of food industry byproducts that are available to us at different points of the country. When we look at the grains to get a picture of where they sit relative to one another, you can see from this table that, and this is just textbook values for the grains as an indication of what we're looking at. The protein levels of the wheat and barley tend to be higher than they are for corn. Corn tends to have more oil than the other grains. But in most other aspects, in terms of starch and other things, most of them are similar, except barley does stand out as being a little different in as much that it has a higher fibre content, and as a consequence of that, a lower starch content. Those two features then lead to a lower energy value in barley relative to the other grains. And whether you're working in the area of digestible energy or metabolizable energy or net energy, the figures there are shown both in megajoules and kilocalories, just show you the relative differences that are typical of these grains. But I'd like to point out that the grains can be quite variable in terms of their composition, depending on the agronomic conditions under which they were grown. And so we need to be able to monitor the actual material that we're working with on a daily basis to ensure that we do understand what the actual energy level is. So we can't take these book values as being necessarily relevant to the material that you would use in any particular circumstance. In terms of the protein or amino acid aspects of the grains, these are the amino acids they contribute at typical protein levels in the grain. So using 7.6% protein for the corn and 10.5 for the barley and 11.7 for wheat, etc. You can see from this table that the essential amino acid contribution, particularly in terms of digestible amino acids, is substantially greater from barley than it is from corn. And the significance of this is that if you're using corn as the base of your diet, then barley, sorry, as the basis of your diet relative to corn, then you'll require less protein meals, particularly in the form of soybean meal, to complement that grain. And with the very expensive cost of soybean at the moment, this is quite a useful attribute. That's just a continuation of the same table, just picking up the additional amino acids. But it also shows here another feature, which is the mineral barley relative to corn, showing higher levels of calcium and phosphorus. These are of probably less economic value than the amino acids, but are still somewhat of an advantage. And as I mentioned, the energy content of the grain can vary quite considerably depending on growing conditions. And there has been a lot of research in Australia undertaken to examine this variability in grain energy content, and has come up with a service known as AusScan, which is a near-infrared reflectance technology for the instant identification of the energy value of grains. This table here shows you the variation in digestible energy in these feeds for pigs, and shows a wide range of up to 4 megajoules of energy from between different samples. Typically, wheat will be around about the 14 megajoule mark, and that figure of 12.9 for barley is fairly common in Australia, although we've enjoyed such a good season in this last growing season in Australia that most of the barley that we're recording at the moment is running around 13.1 and 13.3 DE per, or megajoules of DE per kilo. So it's actually very strong. And there are instances where the barley, if it's very good barley and up the higher end of that spectrum, can actually have an energy value higher than wheat. And so we take advantage of that when it's available. But for the most times, the barley tends to fall around about 1 megajoule less than wheat. Sorghum, on the other hand, there tends to be more consistent throughout the various samples that we've seen, and of course is relatively high in energy due to the high starch content. This AusScan facility that we have in Australia has been a wonderful resource, and I think it's probably one of the best technological advances I've seen in all the time that I've been in stock feed and nutrition. And what it is an instant assessment of the nutritive value of the grain, and these are the parameters that it does show us. From one scan of the sample, we get an indication of both the ileal and the fecal digestible energy content in those samples. And this can be very helpful in showing us the net energy aspects of that grain, in as much that it shows us the site of digestion, how much of the energy is extracted by the end of the terminal ileum versus that which is recovered from hindgut fermentation. Another aspect it shows is the fecal DE index, intake index, and this is a measure of the palatability and the throughput of that grain through the animal and how much they will consume. It also gives us a very good profile of all the other nutrients in the material in terms of the normal proximate analysis of protein, moisture, fat, fiber, starch, ash, etc. This helps to describe the nutritive value very accurately. We also get quite a lot of detail about the fiber components in this material, not only as crude fiber, but also as acid detergent fiber and neutral detergent fiber. But a very useful aspect here too is the NSP, or non-starch polysaccharide characterization, where it identifies the levels of soluble and insoluble NSPs and actually identifies them as either arabinoxylans or beta-glucans, etc. This in turn is useful information to direct us accurately in terms of what enzymes we should be applying to extract full value from the grain. From a feed milling point of view, there's another number of aspects that are highlighted, and these are the sort of hydration capacity of the grain, and this has influences on pelleting efficiency, gelatinization properties of the grain, and how readily the enzymes will access the starch, etc., in the grain. So it's a very useful facility, and one that I think I'm hopeful that you may be able to make use of in due course. When we look at the structure of grains, most of the grain energy is delivered in the form of starch, but these plants or grains store that starch in different ways. And the structure of that starch has a profound impact on the availability of it for digestion. And so the more complex the structure, the starch tends to be less available. We can manipulate this through processing to some extent, and also through enzymes, but just having an understanding of the differences between them helps us know how we need to treat those grains to get the best results. When we look at wheat, the starch granules there are very open and easily accessible and don't require a great deal of assistance to utilize. When it comes to barley, it's a little bit more complex, and there's a number of substances like beta-glucans and that are there that tend to slow down the access to the starch. But again, with enzymic support, we can neutralize that effect and allow full extraction of the starch. Sorghum has its own complications in the form that the starch is encapsulated in a protein matrix. That protein matrix is a Caffrin protein, and to some extent is somewhat indigestible. And so to get access to the starch, we need to finely grind the sorghum and possibly apply a protease enzyme to break up that protein. And finally, corn there is a very different storage structure again, in terms that the starch in corn is in the vitreous endosperm, and it's quite hard and can resist enzymic access, and it too is ground reasonably fine. So as long as we understand the characteristics of those grains, we can then adapt our milling and our processing to suit. Coming now to the features of Australian barley, as Mary mentioned, it's a temperate winter crop where we plant April, May and harvest in October and December. They're mainly two-row varieties, the spring type, and they're mainly focused around malting characteristics, which is addressing the needs of the brewing and distilling industry. But those very same characteristics are what make it very useful as a feed ingredient for animals. It's a medium-sized grain, similar to wheat. It's white but it does have a hull attached to it. It's very low in terms of mycotoxin contamination. Most grains in Australia are harvested very dry and stored that way, and so the risk of mycotoxin contamination is relatively low. We do have also very high quality storage facilities and grain management post-harvest, and this helps to maintain the grain in very good order. One feature of barley though is that it has no yellow pigments, so if you are applying corn in your diets with a view to the pigments that it contributes, then we need to be aware of the fact that if you move across to barley, that there will be a deficit of those pigments, and you may, if you still require those pigments to be there, they may need to be sourced from some other material, but that's not a major concern. It doesn't really affect the nutritive value of the grain greatly. They are, however, considered viscous grains, and this viscosity comes about through the sticky compounds in the grain called non-starch polysaccharides. And these are, of course, the things like beta-glucans and arabinoxylans that we'll talk a little more further on. But basically, these are very easily managed with supplementary enzymes and are of no real concern to pigs. We use barley widely in pig diets, and we have no concerns at all about being able to extract full value from them. When we look at the energy value, as I mentioned, it's lower than the energy in corn or wheat or sorghum, mainly due to the high fiber content and the lower starch. But again, this is of no real concern. It's just as long as we're aware of that, we don't do a direct substitution, we reformulate to account for that energy difference. We can accommodate that difference with extra oil or fat in the diet to bring it up to a specification, or run the diets at a lower nutrient density if necessary. But just because it's different doesn't mean it's not very useful. And similarly, or further to that, the fiber content that is in that grain is considered as an asset to gut health rather than an impediment. It doesn't have a great deal of direct nutrient contribution to the diet, but it does provide a very helpful tool to manage gut health, which is very important for overall performance. The protein in barley is typically higher than corn and similar or slightly lower than wheat, but of particular notice is that it's of high biological value. And this means that the essential amino acids that occur within that protein are well represented, and they go a long way to meeting the requirements of the animal, sparing the use of other protein sources to make up that difference. We use barley extensively in pig diets, and it's considered a very safe and reliable feed component. And here in Australia, although we do have this variation in quality as climatic conditions changes or different regions of the country have different weather patterns, etc., there is a very robust and reliable grading system for grain trading in Australia, so we can get a very clear definition of exactly the quality of the grain that we're using. Anti-nutritional factors do operate, and these are compounds that limit the availability of nutrients for digestion. They come in a number of different forms, and probably as far as barley is concerned, the one of particular interest is the structural anti-nutritional factors, these non-starch polysaccharides that I spoke of, both in their soluble and insoluble form, the soluble being more problematic. And include things like arabinoxylans, beta-glucans, galactans, pectins, and the whole spectrum of complex carbohydrates. But we do have the enzymes available to address these specific compounds, and usually they're of no real concern. Other anti-nutritional factors that occur in some feedstuffs are things like phytates and oxalates. Again, phytate is the storage compound for phosphorus, usually in seeds, and it's very common to most seeds, and we use phytase enzymes, which I'll show you shortly, to overcome the issue of phytate. Other materials have protein digestion and utilization problems associated with protease inhibitors or tannins and other compounds, and we need to be aware of those and take them into account if we're going to make full use of those feedstuffs. But all these inhibitors are known to us, and we do have the know-how to overcome most of these challenges. As far as barley is concerned, the tannins and the protease inhibitors and the oxalates are of no concern at all. Phytate, as I said, occurs commonly in most grains, and we can deal with that with phytase. And the NSP fractions are very manageable with their own specific enzymes. If you look at the NSP content of different feedstuffs, to put it in perspective, you can see here how corn has a very low level of soluble NSP, and that barley has a significant contribution there, and and wheat somewhat intermediate. In terms of the insoluble NSP, this is really the positive fraction, I suppose, in there, and it has the physical advantages in the gut. And barley is very well, has a reasonable contribution of these, which, as I said, can be treated as a positive factor of the grain rather than a negative. If we look at that in a graph, we can see it a little easier, that the blue bar at the bottom there represents the arabinoxylan content. And if you just compare the corn, the wheat, and the barley, you can see there there is a similar level of those compounds in each of those grains. The differentiating factor between those grains is the red bar there, which is the beta-glucan content, which is more prominent in the barley. If we take that a little further and differentiate it into its soluble and insoluble fractions, again, you can compare the wheat, the barley, and the maize here. The wheat, the blue square at the bottom there, represents the soluble xylans, and this is the sticky aspects of wheat that we address with the enzymes. And then they all have a fairly significant content of insoluble xylans. And again, the feature that differentiates the barley is that grey bar there of the soluble beta-glucans. But even though it's potentially a hazard and has historically caused some concern, the advent of endogenous or exogenous enzymes to deal that, and I would suggest is that all broiler feeds and all pig feeds in Australia would include NSP enzymes and phytase today as a matter of course, and we have very little issue with any of those problems. Phytate, as I mentioned, is the storage form for phosphorus in seeds, and the way that the plant usually accesses these is by endogenous phytase enzymes, which then hydrolyze the phytate, release the phosphorus, and allow the plant to germinate and grow. Unfortunately, animals don't have that endogenous phytase enzyme, and so if we want to create a similar effect, we need to supply it as an exogenous enzyme to create the breakdown of this phytate. The phytate molecule is basically an inositol ring to which is attached 6 phosphorus groups. And while it's in this form, it does tend to bind other components of the diet like protein and starch and minerals, etc. And so by hydrolyzing that structure, we not only release the phosphorus to make it available to the animal, but we also free up the bound minerals and any protein or starch, etc., that may be compromised. And then if you strip the phosphorus from that inositol ring, the inositol itself is actually a very valuable nutrient in terms of its benefits for gut development. So the phytase enzyme is been a major breakthrough, I think, as well in terms of feed grain utilization. When you look at the difference between barley, corn, wheat and sorghum, etc., they all have a similar level of phosphorus in them, around 0.3%. And similarly, they all have a phytate content of the order of about 0.7. And so the phytate bound phosphorus then is about 2 grams per kilogram, or 0.2%. So 2/3 of the phosphorus that's in those seeds is there in the form of phytate bound phosphorus. And the final column just gives the percentage of how much of the phosphorus is in that form. And it shows that it's significant. It's of the order of 60 to 70%. And as a consequence indicates that we can get very good response to the use of phytase enzymes when we put them in the diet. So just quickly to recap there, we can manage these anti-nutritional factors largely by the use of exogenous enzymes, particularly the NSP enzymes, the beta-glucanases and the xylanases, and also through the use of phytase and more recently the applications of protease to help with the digestion of protein. We can also apply heat treatments, etc., to do this, and probably the classic example here is the deactivation of the trypsin inhibitor in soybean through heat treatment. But generally speaking, the grains don't require heat treatment as such, that they are very responsive to the enzyme supplementation. Some of the questions we get asked is at times when people are unfamiliar with various grains is just how much they can use of each of them. And I'm afraid that there is no absolute answer here. It's very much a question of your comfort and your risk management attitudes, I guess. Certainly when you're comfortable with a particular grain, you tend to be more confident about using it at higher levels. But as far as wheat's concerned, we have no reservation of using wheat at all in grower finisher or starter through to finisher diets. It's the inclusion is open. We do tend to restrict it to some extent in sow diets, mainly because of the rapidly fermenting nature of the starch can create some gastrointestinal issues if the pig becomes overloaded. In terms of barley, again, we've got a fair degree of freedom with application. We tend to limit it possibly in starter and weaner diets. We want the beneficial aspects of the fibre, but we don't want to have the fibre at a level that will impede the intake of the animal. So we tend to be a bit modest with the fibre or the barley contribution in those diets, but in grower finisher diets, it's no limit, and certainly in dry sow diets, it's no limit. Sorghum is more a question of palatability, and we have various opinions on how much sorghum we can use. But basically in grower finisher and sow diets, again, it's fairly open, and we might be a little bit more restricted with young pigs. And corn, of course, is relatively open, and the only reservation might be it's the use of raw corn in very young pig diets. We might limit it there from a palatability and point of view. Raw material processing is very important. The digestibility of the feed components are directly related to the particle size of the grain after we've milled it. And it's difficult at times, though, to identify the optimum particle size of grains because it's determined by a number of different factors. And some of these factors include the type of grain, whether it be wheat, barley, corn, etc., the stage of production in terms of the weaner, grower, finisher, and sows in the production herd, other processes that might be involved in the preparing of the feed, like the extrusion of the grain or pelleting or enzymic hydrolysis or fermentation, etc., wet feeding. All these things affect the optimum grain or particle size. There's also, depending on the history, the risks and incidence of gastrointestinal disturbances, and if there's been a history there, we tend to be a little bit more attentive to what the grain size should be. Certainly finer grinding tends to accentuate the risks associated with these upsets. Also, milling costs are important because it does cost quite a bit. The exponential the cost of milling rises exponentially as we go to finer and finer grind sizes, and so there's an economic aspect there as how far you want to take it down, but also it affects palatability and feed intake. Very finely ground grains can be rather poorly received by most stock. And there's physical handling aspects in terms of whether you can apply fat to these feeds successfully or not. And of course, the level of respirable dust becomes an issue both for the stock and for the people working in the piggeries. And it's not just the average particle size that's important, it's also the uniformity of those particles. And where we get nice uniform particle size, we get good digestion and few digestive upsets. We get limited particle separation as we handle that feed from the feed mill to the pigs. And we also get very good uniform mixing of all the other components. But when we mill the feed in a form that delivers a lot of variation in the particle size, and this is fairly characteristic of hammer milling in particular, we end up with a lot of small particles and some larger particles. And the small particles can be digested quite rapidly, but they do create handling issues in terms of bridging in silos, etc., palatability issues, respirable dust, gut irritation. And the large particles have their own problems in terms of the delayed digestion associated with the limited enzymic access, and also asynchrony of nutrient delivery. So we need to be mindful that this variability in particle size can be a drawback to the utilization of the grain. And this particular set of data here is one that demonstrates this point. And this is some work that was done as part of the program run by the Pork CRC in Australia, the Premium Grains for Livestock program. And this trial was conducted at the University of Queensland. And what they did was they took a barley-based mash diet. They ground the barley through a 4mm screen and fed it to the pigs. And you can see in the first line there that the growth rate at 800 grams a day and the feed conversion of just over 2 was quite respectable. But then they pelleted that mash feed and fed it again, and you can see that that improved the growth rate and improved the feed efficiency, as we commonly find. But of real interest in this study was that they took that mash feed and sieved out the large particles, and these are particles greater than 1700 micron, and they then reground these particles through a 3.2mm screen and added them back to the mash. As a consequence of that, the pigs actually grew better. They actually ate less feed because they were then extracting more from that food than they previously were because of the more finely ground material. And as a consequence of that, their feed conversion dropped to 1.88, which is an 8% improvement in feed efficiency, just simply by eliminating those large particles out of the mash. And finally, then they pelleted that mash and refed it and found no further improvements. So if we can get the grind size right, we can maximize the efficiency of these grains and may not be necessary to actually pellet the feed. This is another study showing similar advantages in getting the grind size right. This is a trial I conducted myself as part of the Pork CRC here in Australia. And this is in commercial growing facilities using a very common wheat, barley, pea, canola-based diet, and ground through a disc mill and then pelleted. And the different treatments that we applied here was that one group of diets was milled at 600 micron average particle size, where the other was milled at 1200 microns. And we call this fine and coarse. And we created a third treatment here by just blending the two. But the main thing here is just looking at the responses in the animal in the grower phase. The pigs grew quite well at around 830 grams a day and had a feed conversion of the order of 2 to 1 or just over. And what we found was that as we moved from the coarse material down to the fine material, there was even though the growth rate didn't change greatly, the feed efficiency improved. And similarly, in the finisher phase there, the pigs grew quite well at 960 grams a day, feed conversion around 2.4. And again, as we moved from the coarse down to the fine, there was an improvement in feed efficiency. And this, on the bottom left-hand corner of the slide there, you can see that the average improvement in the grower phase was of the order of 3%, and in the finisher phase of around 6%. These are quite useful commercial responses simply to just getting the grind size right. What I've done here is created some examples of how pig diets might be formulated based on the different grains. And so in the first instance here, we have a barley-based diet with 56% barley, which is complemented by 20% of peas and some canola meal, meat meal, canola oil, etc., to produce a diet with a specification of 14.1 megajoules of DE and a standard ileodigestible lysine figure of 0.99%. If we go to the wheat-based diet now, we shift the base from barley to wheat. The other components remain fairly similar. The difference between them is really the oil content. We've had to add the extra oil to the barley-based diet to maintain that common specification that I have for all these diets of 14.1 megajoules. But when you look at the various ones, I've done a sorghum-based diet there as well, and then a combination diet. What you can see is in the current circumstances, with the raw material costs I've assumed, which are in the left-hand column there, the barley-based diet here is the most economical. And that's the way it probably is likely to be in Australia this year, where barley is very competitive price-wise, readily available. I think there will be a major shift towards barley as the basis of our pig diets this year. I've done a similar exercise here for Thailand based on some prices that I was given. I don't know how accurate they are, and of course they do change very rapidly from month to month. So you may suggest that some of the prices I've assumed here are inaccurate, but I think for the point of the exercise, I think you could probably do this yourself and just have a look at the differences. But what I've done here is created a standard maize-based diet and used a few things like cassava and wheat bran and rice bran that are available in Thailand, and using soybean as the main protein source. Again, formulated to the same specification as the diet I just showed you before. If I then formulate that same diet using wheat rather than corn, and it then shuffles the other raw materials to some extent, but also again with barley and then with sorghum, you can notice that one of the features here as we moved to these other grains, the use of soybean comes back mainly because of the improved amino acid contribution from things like barley or wheat. But again, the real advantage is the cost. And if we look at the bottom line there, the cost of using these alternative grains in terms of the final price of the feed is quite substantial. There's something of the order of $25 reduction in the average cost of feed, which is very, very attractive. So I'd encourage you to explore these options as to using these. We can use these grains very effectively and move from one to the other without any interruption to performance of the animal, but there's significant economic advantages in doing so. I don't know why we've got that second line there, but anyway. So selecting the preferred grain for your diets. I think we need to remind ourselves that the pig is a very adaptable omnivore that can utilize a wide range of different feedstuffs very effectively. And we need to also address the fact that a megajoule of energy or a gram of standard ileodigestible amino acids, that can come from any source with equal efficacy. Feed formulation is more about nutrient delivery than ingredient use. We have no real commitment to have any particular material in a feed. We just choose those that give us the best value on the day, and the pigs will adapt to the difference. All feedstuffs have their specific properties, and we need to be cognizant of those when combining them with other components to make up a complete diet. So it's not just a direct substitution. It is, in fact, an informed formulation exercise, but we do need to understand the properties of the materials we're working with, but there is a lot of flexibility. So with a full appreciation of the available nutrient content of the feedstuffs and any peculiar constraints to their use, the prime determinant becomes the relative cost of delivering those necessary nutrients. And to be economically competitive, we need to maintain an open mind to all the options that are available to us. Corn and soybean meal may be the dominant components in much of the world's pig foods, but they are not essential. And we just probably need to challenge ourselves in that regard. So to conclude, the pig has an ability to utilise a broad range of feedstuffs to meet its nutritional needs. Traditionally in Asia, corn has been the predominant grain employed. However, with increasing international trade and other grain alternatives have emerged, representing a real economic advantage. Australia at the moment is enjoying a very productive barley harvest this year, resulting in significant quantities being available for export at competitive prices. And certainly the domestic Australian pig industry will take advantage of this situation and utilise barley as the dominant grain this year. The opportunity also presents itself to our near Asian neighbours, and I think is well worth considering. Thank you.
Tony, thank you very much. That was an extremely comprehensive presentation of using alternative Australian grains for swine rations, covering off on fibre, amino acids, enzyme juices, milling processes, gut health, ease of management of anti-nutritional factors, grain sizes of grain, or grinding the size to get the right size, grinding the grain to get the right size. We're going to move on now, everybody, into our panel session. So we're going to hold the questions over into our panel. There have been a few people that have just come on. So for the panel sessions, can you put your questions into the Q&A? We are monitoring the Q&A, and we will ensure if your question doesn't get answered on the Q&A panel session, that we will respond later. For those people that have just joined us and would like to hear the Q&A panel session in Thai, you'll need to go to the bottom of your Zoom image there, look for the global icon and click down on either English or Thai. Okay, so we'll move into the panel session now. The panel session is titled about the nutritional value and merits of using barley in rations for swines. The chair of the panel session is AGIC's CEO, Mr. Richard Simonitis. Welcome, Richard. Richard has a broad experience in export-focused commodity industries and has worked in logistics and product quality roles in iron ore and in senior management roles in the grains industry, again across logistics, operations, marketing and trade. Richard has international experience in developing a number of grain infrastructure projects in Indonesia, and he also has a passion for feed grains of for Australia. So Richard, I think you're the most appropriate person to be the MC of this this panel session. Over to you, Richard.
Thanks very much, Mary, and welcome everybody to the Q&A session. Thanks very much, Tony, for a fantastic presentation, very detailed and great depth of information there. Thank you. I don't think I need to introduce you any further. It is, however, my pleasure to introduce Dr. Pairat Srisharma from the CP group. So we all know that CP is a leading animal feed manufacturer, maybe the biggest in the world even, and is also a massively vertically integrated company. So involved in not only production of livestock and other agriculture, but also into agro-industrial and the food business. So Dr. Pairat is the Senior Vice President of Feed Technology with CP, and comes very well qualified, having done his undergrad work at Prince of Songkhla University in Thailand, and then masters at Kazakhstan University in Thailand, and then his doctorate in animal science at the University of Missouri, Columbia in USA. So great academic background there, and has expertise spanning animal nutrition in both swine and poultry, feed formulation, feed management, and R&D in animal feed products. So welcome, Dr. Pyrat.
Yes, good morning and good afternoon to you, Richard. Thank you very much for your kind introduction.
Okay, no worries. We've had just one question come through on the QA, more of a comment really about the move maybe 18 months ago in Thailand to start to monitor some chemicals. And it's in a inspect and monitor type mode at the moment. I think the answer to that question really from the Australian side is that chemical use is tightly regulated, and we'll only be using those chemicals within their labels and applying appropriate withholding periods to their use. So from the Australian side, it's very unlikely that we would see those chemicals enter into our supply chains. But I'd be happy to hear comments from either of our two panel members.
Well, firstly, I'd just like to endorse that comment about the regulation here in Australia. That we're very conscious of what chemicals are used, and in fact, growers have to sign a statutory declaration to say that they're not using anything that's outside the guidelines. And we've done a lot of industry testing actually of chemical residues in feedstuffs, and it's a pretty good track record that we have in terms of very clean product.
And sorry, some more questions coming through. A question around particle size in pig feed. Can you please clarify in millimeters the particle size in each of the fine, medium and coarse categories from your presentation, Tony?
Okay. Well, basically the medium was just made up by mixing the other two. The other two was 600 micron is the fine one, which is actually 0.6 of a millimeter is the average particle size. And the other was 1200 microns, which is 1.2 millimeters average particle size. Generally speaking, the softer grains like wheat and barley probably don't need to be ground as fine as corn or sorghum, because the sorghum we need to break up the Caffrin matrix, and in the corn we need to break down the vitreous endosperm. The wheat and barley type grains tend to be softer and more open, and we just need to get them down. So typically we would suggest that corn-based diets, we would like to mill at 500 to 600 micron, and maybe for wheat-based diets that could be more like an optimum of 700 to 900 microns. But it does depend. It depends on whether we're addressing weaner pigs, grower pigs and sows, and certainly the gut health aspects are very important. And this is where the fiber component in the barley plays a role, independent of the particle size, is it has a great capacity there to maintain gut health just from its fiber contribution.
And Dr. Pyrat, I see you nodding profusely there. Can I ask you to add your thoughts, please?
Yes, I think from our experience, I think thank you very much for the information from Tony's presentation today. So I probably share with you about our experience to using the barley from Australia. As he already gave a presentation, we start from the book values, and then go to the chemical composition, so to know the proximate analysis. And then in our research station, we do have the biological value, like digestible energies, to understand. As we know that from the lab, in terms of chemical composition, starch, fibers, and amino acid. And then the last and not least, I think after that, we do test with animal. We call the animal response. So we do titrate them. So if we're thinking barley as an option, so we have the regular diet, typical the Thai or Asian countries. And then we start replace by using the software least cost formulation. And then we titrate 0, 10, 20, 30, and 40 to see how the animal responds. With this, I think we can justify what is the optimum level, and then how much for the economic returns. In terms of particle size, I think I totally agree with. I think in pigs we tend to grind them quite fine particles, but it need to justify what the typical age of the animal also. So right now we have two major groups. So one is young animals. I would considering up to 25 or 30 kilo. We tend to grind them between from 400 to 700 something, probably average 500 to 600 or about 0.5 millimeter to 0.6 as Tony mentioned. The other group is we probably considering or classify as adult pigs. So probably the grower, finisher, or the breeders. That one probably can go between 700 up to 1,200. So and then we do the same. We grinding two group and then we blending up to the each period of the pigs. So I think Tony already answered perfectly. So I think a lot of good information from Tony's presentation. I think we need to learn more. I think Asian probably we still lack of experience, but I think and the variation, in terms of energy values. So I think we still need to learn more a little bit and how to extract more from this good option of the raw materials. And then probably applies a couple of things more like enzyme or others to test. That is from our experience.
Yeah, definitely encouraging the Thai industry to use all of the options available to really optimize the economic value. And that's where the gains can be made and profitability increases. So I have another question, which is probably best for you, Dr. Pyrat. Will feed barley become a regular item in the pork feed formula in Thailand?
I think it depends on the environment. So far at the moment, with this condition, it seems to be quite favorable for us. We're still looking for some other beneficial effects. As you know, in the swine industry, they tend to move more on the prolific sows. We're learning that we import the genetic line from Europe, that they have more piglet, but they're quite sensitive to the gastric ulcer. And then the way the solution that they apply, they tend to need to have some certain amount of soluble fiber. In their country, probably they use sugar beet pulp or something like that too. And then I see the value from barley. They have quite amounts of soluble fiber also. So I think that if we apply the right enzyme and see the benefit from the gut health, or could improve the gastric ulcer for the new genetic line or prolific sows, that could be a good source of raw material for us also.
Thank you. And Tony, as the industry globally moves away from antibiotic use, the benefits of fiber at a younger age, do you have any views on that?
Oh, certainly. Yes, no, it is a general consensus, I guess, that we are attempting to reduce antibiotic use and we've got more responsible in our use of those. But it's not just a question of stopping using them. It's coming up with an alternative system of health management that will allow things to proceed. And so what we've seen in the past is that antibiotics have been used to prop up relatively poor management. And taking them away will just reveal that poor management again unless we do something about it. So it's a more comprehensive approach where we have to go back and look at the comfort of the animals in terms of the environment that we're having them, the stocking rate, taking other precautions in regard to their health in terms of hygiene and vaccination and other procedures, as well as looking after the animal itself and giving it every opportunity. Things like improving the colostrum transfer of immunity at birth, and then looking after the gut, because the gut itself is probably the largest immune organ in the pig. And when the gut's unhappy or irritated or angry, then the immune status of that animal is compromised. And this what allows other disease entities to enter and cause problems. So if we keep the gut healthy, we'll go a long way to eliminating the use of antibiotics to prop up these other issues. So I'm a great advocate of looking to the not only for performance in the animals, but also to maximize gut health and the welfare of the animals at the same time.
Right. And Dr. Porat, your views?
I think that it lies. I think that right now, so people concern more and more, not just at a global level. I think when it comes to the local levels, I think the race without antibiotics become more and more. I think we need to pay attention on that. I think Asian countries start to have some limitation to use the antibiotics also. In Thailand, I think after 25, we're not allowed to use the antibiotic for growth promoters. Vietnam or other country not allowed also. So I think the fiber could be one, could be one that, but we still need many things to work more on this. For us, we start focus on the fiber, but we want to understand how the evolution, how we start from the baby piglet and to see the microbiome is changing. So at the moment we use sequencing using C10S to understand how the evolution of the microbiome. So it seemed to be if we could utilize the fiber to promote the good bacteria or maintain or lowering the pathogenic bacteria could be a good source. And I think the people in Europe, probably you guys have a lot of experience in Australia. Maybe we need to learn more from you.
And Dr. Porat, we've spoken quite a bit about the nutritional side. Thailand has been using barley for a few years now, maybe 3 years.
3-4 years.
What are your thoughts, or have you heard anything around the industry about the physical side, storing the grain, how it works in pellets, those sort of things?
I think from our experience, I think the early stage they may concerns a little bit about the grain size or something like that, or the storage. But I think after using for quite some time, we're familiar with. I think at the moment for us, it's not an issue. It's not an issue.
Okay, and we have one last question from the audience, and this is a wheat question. The question is feed wheat nutrients much lower than common wheat, so milling wheat? What is the average feed wheat protein content? So the Thai market usually buying ASW, so it'll be sub 10.5%. But any comments on the nutritional side of it, Tony or Dr. Porat?
Probably Tony can answer first.
Right. I don't know what I've done, but I've lost my screen, I think. Oh, yes.
We've
Not
got
to worry,
you.
I'll just talk to you. I can't see you, but I'll talk to you. Look, in terms of the wheat production in Australia, as I mentioned, the barley production was focused primarily around malting properties. The wheat has been primarily focused around milling crop for flour. And much of the differences associated with that. Many of the properties like falling number and things like this have no real interest to us in feed milling, but they're very, of course, of a concern to flour millers and bakers. So when it comes to the food value of feed wheats versus ASW or other wheats, really the difference is not that great in general terms. Within each section of grain, there's a lot of variability in terms of the composition of those materials. So probably there's more variation within a category than there is between categories. And so feed wheats aren't necessarily inferior to ASW wheats. They don't qualify for the ASW classification because they don't necessarily have the flour milling endorsements. And so we find we've got no problems in feeding feed wheats to our stock, and we just make sure that we characterize those grains by their analyses in terms of their protein, their starch characteristics, their fiber characteristics, etc., and therefore their energy values, and we base it on that rather than whether or not they're a feed wheat or an ASW or an all-purpose wheat or whatever.
Richard, from my experience, I think totally agree with Tony. We realize we don't worry about the groups, feed wheat or other group of wheat. We rely mainly on the lab analysis for the chemical composition, and then we will go more on the biological values in terms of energy or something like that, and then the amino acid. And then the last we will test with animal. So far I don't think it's an issue at all.
Right.
Thank
we
you.
sometimes have some debate here between red wheats and white wheats and these sort of things. And basically, again, it comes down to the fact that when you analyze them, if they have a very similar nutrient profile by analysis, they're likely to perform true to that analysis rather than any other descriptor that you might put on it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, thanks, guys. We have had one late question, or late to me at least. What is the importance concerned with the anti-nutritional factors, and how's that different between a grower pig and a finisher pig?
Okay. Well, certainly from the NSP point of view, which are the main anti-nutritional factors in the grains, in barley in particular, as the animal gets older, they get more tolerant of those components, and they can handle it. And in fact, in adult animals, in sows, many people wouldn't bother to use xylanases or beta-glucanases there because their digestive system is robust enough to accommodate it, but it's more pronounced in the young pigs. Personally, I add NSP enzymes to all classes of stock. I think even if the benefit's marginal, it's usually cost effective. They're relatively cheap, these enzymes, and they're very effective. And so and at the end of the day, we don't know often what level of NSP is in the actual grain. It's a fairly expensive and time-consuming exercise to analyze it to find out what's there. So I would think that most people take the insurance approach and say, let's put the enzyme in there. If there's a significant amount of NSP, it'll deal with it. If there isn't, then it was possibly unnecessary, but it didn't cost much anyway. So it was very good experience. And most of the problems we have when NSPs have an effect is to drag the performance down. So when there's a very good wheat with very low or barley with low levels of NSP, then maybe the enzyme response is not so great. And on those that have a higher level, of NSP, you'll get quite a substantial response. What it tends to do is bring all grains up to a common level rather than take all grains up by the same proportion. So those that need it get a better response. Those that don't need it have maybe a marginal response. But overall, the bottom line is we get a more consistent performance from the animals for having that insurance there to cover for those NSPs when they do occur.
And Dr. Pyrat, it sounds like you've applied a very strong methodology to some of this stuff. What are your thoughts?
I think it's a general information that young animal more sensitive to the anti-nutritional factors. So, but in barley, if you apply the NSPs, so I think it's not a big issue. So we apply the phytase enzyme. We apply the NSP enzyme. So I think in the near future, probably we need to know how to use best. How to best use, apply the enzyme and gain the most benefit. But if you apply, it seems to be not an issue at the moment. But if you want to go further step, try to extract the most nutrient from these types of raw material. Probably need to understand the combination of the NSP enzyme. Because the NSP is a big group of the enzyme. You have silanase, you have glucanase, many things. I think that in the near future, probably we need to learn more from the experience from Australia, because of the NSP, non-starch polysaccharide, is a big group of sugar. Probably we need to understand how to come up with a combination and how it combine with other phytase or even protease together. And hopefully, if we break down all of this, I think the anti-nutritional factor may not be a big issue to apply to all period of the pig productions.
Well, it sounds like a great opportunity for a future event, and maybe one that we can start to work on as a collaboration opportunity with Thailand. There has been a question just about the slides, and we will get those out to everyone who's registered in the next 24 hours when we just get them into a format that it's a bit easier to move. So thank you, Tony. Once again, mate, fantastic job. Very great depth of knowledge and heaps of information there for our friends in Thailand to use. Dr. Pyrat, thank you, sir.
You're welcome.
I've been very impressed that your approach has been very much evidence-based and getting into the science. And I guess that's the opportunity for our friends and customers who have been on the webinar today, is to answer those questions for themselves and really understand how the opportunities to optimize that usage can present themselves. So Dr. Pyrat, thank you, and I'll give you the opportunity to have some closing remarks from the Thai side before I hand back to Mary to close the webinar and to talk us through the poll survey. So floor's yours, sir.
So first, I would like to thank you, the IGIX organization, to having me to join. So not just to share. So today I learned a lot about the barleys, and not just only barleys. I think Australia is a big country and a big source of the grain productions around the world. So I think the Asian country, I would say that we have quite limitation in terms of source of the grain. So it may not enough to our animal consumption. So today I would like to thank you, all of you that organized the meeting. That could be a good for our friend, our colleagues that work in this area. So hopefully we can take home messages from what we learned today and apply to our animal production in this area. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And I'll hand it back to Mary.
Thank you very much, Richard and Tony and Dr. Pyrat. As just reinforcing what Richard has just said, it was a tremendous panel session, great interaction from the audience. We're really grateful for the amount of people that have actually come online today from Thailand. So in closing, I'd actually like to thank Austrade again for their assistance and Karen giving a presentation, Dr. Pyrat again for coming on and supporting this webinar. And let's hope we can continue to do some more great work into Thailand around alternative Australian feed grains. Again, Tony, terrific in-depth presentation of uses of Australian alternative grains for swine. It was extremely comprehensive, extremely technical. And as Richard said, we'll be sharing the presentations at a later date once they're all in a format to be shared. Richard, always good as an MC. You always think very well on your feet, and you always have a depth of knowledge around the feed grains industry. So thanks, Richard, for emceeing the panel session. It's really important. It's one of the best discussion sessions we get in these webinars. I'd also like to acknowledge some of the back behind scenes work, and that's from the DSM in Thailand, Madam Vora, and also DSM Asia Pacific and the Australian team. They were very supportive along with the Australian grains trading industry to facilitate this webinar today. So thank you to all those that actually supported AGIC in doing this. Now, before I close out, we do have a poll. So we would like you to fulfill the poll so we know whether we really did hit our targets and if there's any extra work we would like that would be liked AGIC to do. But in closing, as Tony said, the swine industry, the swine is a very adaptable to feed grains, and the feed grains industry is very competitive. We know that alternative feed materials are an obvious option, and barley presents it as an option. We talked about optimising the economic value of using barley, and that is where the gains will be made once we understand how to optimise those values. By incorporating enzymes in and which are a minimal cost, you'll be able to maximise your return of input. So as the feed industry industrialises, we understand that technical support will be integral to part of that industrialisation. So we look forward to further communications and engagements regarding feed grains for the swine industry into Thailand and other feed grain and feed other livestock as well. In the end, thank you again, everybody that came online. It's been abundant of people that supported this event, and we wish you all the best to our friends in Thailand. Thank you very much to everybody who supported us. We'll stay on live here while people populate the polls.